Welcome. And I'm Greg Thrush, and I'll be the moderator this evening. Tonight, we are holding another presentation as part of the CEA education series related to the proposed opening of the Idaho-Maryland Mine. This meeting is being hosted by Community Environmental Advocates Foundation. CEA Foundation performs research, education, and advocacy to promote responsible land use and environmental protection policies in Nevada County. They have a website. It's www.cea-nc.org. You can find a lot of information there. CEA Foundation also sponsors MineWatch, a campaign that brings together a coalition of nonprofit organizations, residents, and businesses opposed to the mine. And there's also a website for that specific campaign. It's www.minewatchnc.org. And recordings of all the webinars that we have had up until now, and we'll include this one once we have a chance to put it up, can be found on the MineWatch site. So if for some reason a friend or family member who wanted to attend tonight could not, you can just give them the link and they can find this talk. So many of us attended last Thursday to see an online presentation of the results of the economic impact report hosted by the report's author, the consultant Robert D. Niehaus, Inc. We'll probably refer to him tonight as RDN or Niehaus. Just know that that's the author of the economic study. There are good reasons to take a very close look at the report. In the estimation of many, it is far less than definitive. And some of the results were good news for us, but several more raised some real concerns. And tonight's presentation will focus on the details and the implications of this report. So here's the agenda for this evening. Ralph Silberstein will give a brief high-level view of the project status and the economic study. Dr. David Chambers has agreed to present this evening. He's a mining expert and will talk about the industry perspective of the proposed mine based on the information provided in the environmental impact report. Jim Steinmann will talk about the nature of mining industry jobs and economics. John Vaughan will present about the details related to the revenue, sales, local spending, and general fund projections that are discussed in the RDN economic impact report. And then we have Charlie Brock, a longtime resident and local realtor, and he will talk about the RDN report real estate conclusions provided by consultants. And then Martin Webb will talk about the comparisons the economic report used in its analysis of property values, as well as make some closing comments about the economic study and the prospects of a mine in our community. And then to close tonight's presentation, we'll then have a question and answer. And then to close the presentation, we will discuss about what actions are needed in the next few months to oppose the mine as the mine application process moves into the decision-making phase. Okay, let's begin. So I want to introduce Ralph Silberstein. Ralph is the president of CEA Foundation. Ralph has served as a Grass Valley Planning Commissioner and on the Nevada County Fish and Wildlife Commission. He is a retired software engineer, business owner, and a former building contractor. With 20 years of experience working on mining issue, he is an invaluable resource in the MineWatch campaign. And we are just, Ralph is just such an important person in all of this work that the community's been doing. And I think most people know that, but I just want to acknowledge that Ralph is really fabulous. And Ralph, can you give us a brief overview of what's happening at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I'm going to hit on the recent events, starting with Well Owners Wells Coalition. So a group of well owners from the Wells Coalition went before the Board of Supervisors on December 13th to express their concerns that the threat to their wells is not being addressed in the draft EIR. The speakers provided evidence of the uncertainty in predicting impacts to groundwater in fractured rock systems, noted past failures, and asked for protection and to follow precedents with a domestic well monitoring program. In previous county projects, such as the most recent application to open the San Juan mine in 2012, and when the Idaho-Maryland mine was granted a 5-year use permit to dewater the mine for exploration in 1996, monitoring data was gathered in advance to provide a baseline. CEQA requires the draft EIR to contain current baseline well data in order to assess the potential impacts and have a means of defining mitigations. Current well data from all of the 300 plus nearby wells needs to be gathered and included in a revised draft EIR. Okay, so no doubt you've heard the final EIR was released on Friday. As one expert who is familiar with the draft EIR stated, that's ridiculous. There were numerous omissions and errors in the draft that required it to be updated and recirculated for review and comment to comply with CEQA. The county apparently ignored all of that. So what is the Nevada County Planning Commission's role? The Planning Commission hearing in February or March will vote on whether to certify the final EIR, and they will also make a recommendation to the board on project approval or denial. So regarding the comment period is not 10 days, it's at least until January 25th for a hearing after February 1st. We requested an extension of time and for clarification on the deadline for written comments. So we're hoping to hear back on that. So stay tuned, and we will be reviewing the final EIR and providing more information and ways that you can get involved. The next few months will be very important. So about the economic, slide please, the economic study. Kudos to the Nevada County Board of Supervisors who commissioned this report in order to get a reliable independent analysis of the impacts of the proposed mine on our local economy. We appreciate their taking action on this rather than relying on a private report that was produced by Rise Gold. Consultant RDN's source of information was problematic, and it's important to note that most of the report is, I quote, based on the assumption that it would operate as proposed by the applicant and is documented in the project description in the draft EIR. We feel that these are huge assumptions. CEA Foundation and many others have provided clear reasons why the draft was inadequate and that it required recirculation before a final EIR could be produced. The draft failed to correctly identify significant impacts, with missing key baseline data and contained major errors. Also, Rise Gold did not provide any estimates of the cost of facilities construction or dewatering the mine. So RDN was given a job of making an accurate economic study based on missing, misleading, limited, and unvetted data in many cases. In other words, there's a lot of questionable things to say about this report, which we will talk about. But I do want to make clear that the report provides a lot of useful information about the mine project in general, and it gives us a good framework for assessing the economic impacts and for correcting the record regarding claims made by Rise Gold. Next slide, please. I'll briefly point out a couple of examples. For the indirect jobs numbers, Rise was claiming 300 would be produced by the project, and RDN report rolled that back to 163. And in terms of local spending from the project, the Rise report claimed $12.5 million spent locally, and the RDN report rolled that back to $5 million. Okay, so that's all I have to say at this point. We'll move on to the first of our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ralph. That was just a very fast touch on the economic report. All of our panelists tonight are going to speak at it with more length, so just know that. So next, our next presenter will be Dr. David Chambers. David Chambers is the founder and president of the Center for Science and Public Participation. It's a nonprofit corporation formed to provide technical assistance on mining and water quality to public interest groups and tribal governments. Dr. Chambers has 45 years of experience in mineral exploration and development, 15 years of technical and management experience in mineral exploration industry, and for the past 30 years, he's served as an advisor on the environmental effects of mining projects, both nationally and internationally. He has a professional engineering degree in physics from the Colorado School of Mines, a Master of Science degree in geophysics from the University of California at Berkeley, and is a registered professional geophysicist in California. Dr. Chambers received his PhD in environmental planning at Berkeley. His recent research focuses on tailings dam failures and the intersection of science and technology with public policy and natural resource management, financial assurance for mine closure and post-closure, and the water impacts of mining. Dr. Chambers, welcome. Thank you so much for being part of this evening, and go ahead.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Greg. And again, my name is Dave Chambers. I'm talking to you from Bozeman, Montana, where we're forecast to be 35 below zero at this time tomorrow night. So I'm envious of California temperatures right at the moment. If we could have the first slide, that would be useful. Thank you. So my specialty is not economics, but since our theme tonight is economics, I want to discuss a couple of findings that I made in reviewing two documents, and these findings have economic implications. The first document I'd like to talk about is what's called, as you'll see in the top line there, the technical report on the mine project, which was prepared by Amec Foster Wheeler, dated June 1, 2017. So that report's over 5 years old at this point in time. But these reports, which are called NI 43101, NI is National Instrument 43, Section 101. And this is a requirement that's mandated by the Canadian Stock Exchange. So if the company is listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange, it has to provide these documents. And these technical reports are required whenever there's a substantial change in the nature of a project. So the fact that there hasn't been an updated report for 5 years basically says the fundamental basics of the project are still the same, because this is the official technical report for the project. These reports are prepared by what are called qualified persons, that is, people that are not only knowledgeable in their field of analysis, and there's typically half a dozen or so that are involved with preparing each of these reports, but these people have to put their professional reputation behind their findings. So what I've listed down below the first couple lines are a number of sections, 9, 15, 16, etc. And each of these sections in a technical report, which is sometimes called a preliminary economic assessment, although this technical report doesn't qualify as a PEA because it doesn't contain enough economic information to put it over that threshold. But these sections normally contain a lot of information about the development that's going to take place. And I generally go to these because sometimes I can get information that doesn't even appear in an environmental impact review. So they're generally pretty informative. But the thing I wanted to point out was that under each of these headings, there's virtually no information. What I have literally done is take all of the verbiage that was provided under that section and put it on this page. So for instance, for exploration, the report says RISE has not completed an exploration work program on the property. And I think that's still true. Mineral reserve estimates. There are no mineral reserve estimates for the project. Mining methods, recovery methods, not applicable to the current status because there isn't enough information. Project infrastructure, market studies, environmental studies, capital and operating costs, economic analysis. There just isn't enough information for those experts to provide any even detail on those sections. And this is, I quite frankly have never seen that in a technical report, that lack of information. Let's go to the next slide because I want to talk about mineral reserve estimates a little bit. There is no mineral reserve estimate for this project. So what is a mineral reserve? This diagram is a bit complicated. I will admit more complicated than it needs to be. The diagram itself, the reason I use this one is because it comes from the International Council on Mining and Metals, which is the industry association internationally. So it's a very well accepted source. And under the word exploration results on the top, you'll see two categories, mineral resources and mineral reserves. And what you need to have if you're going to have really a viable mine proposal is to have some sort of mineral reserve identified, because that establishes the amount of ore and the amount of metal that you hope to recover from this project. So most projects will have a mineral reserve. Down below the mineral reserve, you'll see probable and proved. Those two categories are generally lumped together. So a mineral reserve is defined as probable and proved ore. A mineral resource, on the other hand, isn't as well defined. It can be measured and indicated, or the weakest category is inferred. And in most economic analysis, measured and indicated are lumped together, and then inferred is a third separate major category. So a probable and proven mineral reserve is a mineral reserve that's been drilled out to a drill hole density such that you have a very good idea of what sort of ore is contained in that defined ore body. Indicated and measured, that's usually a category that means your drill spacing is such that you have a decent idea, but not enough to really call it a mineral resource. And then the inferred category means you've probably got a few drill holes, you know there's something down there, but you don't really know how much. So the important thing about this whole discussion is that Idaho-Maryland doesn't have a mineral resource or a mineral reserve. And again, that's just highly unusual for a project to be asking for a production permit without having a mineral resource defined. I don't think, quite frankly, I've ever seen that, but there's no law, there's no rule that says you have to have it. It's just highly unusual. The second document I'd like to talk about is the environmental impact report. I reviewed the draft report, which is dated December 2021. And of course, the final has just come out a year later. And there are three things that I want to touch on that come out of this EIR that have economic implications. The first is waste disposal. The mine plan says that the waste rock that comes out of this mine, that is the rock that's not ore, is going to be either disposed of on the site or used and sold as what's called engineered fill, which is stuff like road fill or foundation material. I think that's a problem because in general, trying to sell mine waste, even if it's technically clean, is still a tough thing to do because there's still potential liability with rock that contains mineralized material, even if it's very low concentrations. And someone who buys that and uses it could potentially run into some liability down the line. So my experience has been that most buyers are just very reluctant to buy that sort of rock when they can get verifiably clean sources like sand and gravel elsewhere. The other sort of potential problem with this engineered fill material being sold, that is the mine waste being sold, is that you do have to test it and prove to the best of your ability that it's not contaminated. And that, of course, is done by taking a representative sample and testing that. We don't know at the present time what the exact geochemistry of that rock is going to be. It would, of course, have to be sampled as it comes out of the ground according to some protocol, which has yet to be established. Right now, I'm questioning the geochemical characterization of the waste rock that's taken place. The EIR says there's going to be about 2 million tons of waste rock produced in the first 11 years of mining. And to the best of my ability to look at the samples that were used to make that analysis, that analysis comes from 2 samples that come from a total of 11 feet of drill core. So that's a very small sample to represent a lot of tonnage of material. It does not meet the widely accepted recommendation for the number of samples. So I just think that geochemical characterization has to be preliminary at this point in time. There are significant planning gaps associated with the material provided for the EIR. There's no existing monitoring plan, although there are promises to produce one. There's no waste characterization plan, which is the plan that you would use to test the protocols that you would use to test the waste rock. Normally that material would be provided as a part of an EIR so that people like me can say, this is where things are going to be sampled, say for surface water or groundwater. And these are the constituents that are going to be sampled. All of that is important, and none of it's available in the EIR at present. And then in terms of the waste characterization, again, I don't think the waste rock is adequate. The tailings, the characterization I have questions about. That characterization for the tailings is based on only 4 samples, 4 samples that are physically different in size, so they're going to produce different leaching results, probably just because of the size when they're tested. And what the reason you leach, essentially drain water through this material, is you want to see what the water picks up when it comes out. The tailings for this mine were tested using distilled water. Now, rainwater, which is what is really going to be moving through this material when it's placed on the surface, isn't distilled water. It typically has a lower pH. It has more ability to leach metals out of material on the surface. And most testing that's done for mines is of this kind is done using a weak acid solution instead of distilled water. So again, there are no hard and fast rules about how this testing must be done, but the testing protocol that was used for the tailings and waste rock and the EIR is not typical of what I would see in that sort of a document. And then finally, financial assurance is something that I've spent a lot of time with over the years. The company has asked Nevada County to issue a permit to mine for 80 years. And yet I don't believe that the information that's been supplied in the EIR is sufficient to justify a permit to mine for that length of time. In fact, this is really, this project is at a very post preliminary exploration stage. It's not a production project. There's no mineral resource. And the first step is to go down and find out what you've got down there. That would involve dewatering the mine and doing drilling from underground. And that's going to have to take place inevitably, but you don't need to grant a project, a production permit in order to do that. Now, I don't know of any mine that I've ever reviewed who's been given a permit for 80 years. I can think of one or two for 20, but when you ask for a permit of that type, you generally have to provide plans that say what you're going to do for that entire period of time, how much waste you're going to produce, where that waste is going to go, and of course, how you're going to close that project out. And much of that information is still lacking. Part of a closure plan, and I'm sure this is true in California, is to provide a financial assurance. These financial assurances are important because even for a mine like this one, that would be tens of millions of dollars. And in some cases, it could be hundreds of millions of dollars. I think the largest, actually, I'm aware of two of them that have financial assurances that are over 500 million. Those are for large mines. This isn't a large mine, but it just shows you the magnitude it can go to. And that number tends to get very big if there's long-term water treatment involved. This mine is not predicted to have long-term water treatment, but I'm not very comfortable about the predictions that have been made that support that prediction. So I think it's still an issue. And basically, if a permit is issued for a mine for that length of time, then that regulator has to say that if this mine closes down for any reason, we're going to have enough money on hand at any point in time to close that mine properly so that it doesn't have environmental and economic impacts on the community that it's in. And in order to establish that financial assurance, you need a lot of information that just isn't available at this point in time. So if I were a regulator, I would be very uncomfortable at this point granting a permit for a mine and trying to establish an adequate financial assurance, a financial assurance that would protect the public, based on the information that's available. And then just one final word on financial assurances. Even though they're typically required for every large mine in the US, and this is a state-by-state requirement in large part, those financial assurances never cover anything but what I want to call reasonably foreseeable conditions. So if you were to have something like a tailings dam failure or some other catastrophic environmental event, that financial assurance is not made to cover those sort of accidents. So just because you have a financial assurance, that doesn't mean that you're totally covered as a nearby community. So I'm going to stop there. I'd be glad to take questions when the time comes, but Greg, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chambers. Yeah, so that was a deeper dive into into some of the implications of the EIR and how they connect with the financial aspects. And so now what we want to do is actually give some other panelists more opportunity to talk at more depth about this. And so what I'd like to do is introduce Jim Steinmann. Jim is a resident of Grass Valley, and he's a founder of his facility planning project management firm. He has 55 years experience as a planning consultant for large-scale development projects. The vast majority of the projects included analysis of alternatives, environmental impacts, and economic evaluations of alternative courses of action. 3 of the projects Jim participated in are particularly relevant to the proposed gold mine activation that is being considered here in Grass Valley. So Jim, welcome, and take it away.
Thank you, Greg. I'd like to provide you with my perspective of the economic impact report as developed by RDN. This is based on having spent the majority of the past 6 years up in North Dakota observing the impact of the influx of hundreds, if not thousands, of temporary and part-time workers commuting into the oil fracking fields. I was engaged by Williams County in Williston, North Dakota, to help them overcome the negative impact of that influx of workers and the environmental problems created by the oil fracking. I've also had the opportunity to provide firsthand observation in a number of Nevada mining communities, mainly in rural, isolated areas, under a contract with the Nevada Department of Transportation to develop an impact of capital facility requirements for their needs. As previously mentioned, I've been a consultant on a number of capital development projects that included the development of an environmental impact statement and economic impact statements, and I participated in that. So I've got the unique perspective of having a mindset of knowing where the authors come from and what their general prejudice might be towards the development of that data. And then I've been a consultant to governments in the analysis of projects and development of capital projects for the past 55 years. Next slide, please. The nature of my observations will be concerned with my firsthand observations of the nature of mine work environment and impact on the community. Mine working is 12 hours on, 12 hours off, underground, dangerous, and very, very much in need of trained personnel to provide those services. The potential source of employees, particularly for the below grade and the industrial activity, the impact on the quality of life in the community and the life of the workers that are coming into the community. And then I'll be assessing my review of the economic impact estimate on the community and closing with the potential risks associated with this particular project. Next slide, please. Yeah, the economic impact indicates that there is positive economic impact to the community based upon increased employment, construction spending, the property tax increment that goes to the county, sales tax that might be retained by the county. And then on the negative side, the cost of government services to be able to accommodate the operation of the mine, compliance monitoring by RISE and others, the impact on property values, which is either inconclusive or non-existent relative to the documentation that they provided in the recommendations. And there's nothing in the RDN report that really talks about the cost of environmental degradation or, gosh forbid, the health of the people in the community. The basis of this economic report needs to identify to the approval authority that the benefits must be substantial to overcome the negative environmental impact. The benefits must be very substantial and overriding to be able to overcome the negative side of the environmental impact study. Next slide. Mining is a different kind of a job. In the report, as presented by Rice also, we're talking about a workforce of predominantly below grade and industrial workers, some 270 of those workers working 12-hour shifts on, 12 hours off for a 7-day work week. Then they go away for 7 weeks or go home and then come back. So they're only in the county or working 50% of the time to get their full job. We contend that the housing pattern for those commuting workers is different from the 2.4 family members assumed in the RDN report for the economic impact. The majority of those workers, we believe, will live outside the county, commute in 50% of the time. Most or many will be living in a shared rental with multiple people per bedroom, or live in a trailer,
a recreational vehicle, or a camper. Their spending pattern in the community will not be that of a typical 2.4 person family. It'll be a single person with shared rental and spending money for 14 days worth of meals per month. They will be unlikely to spend the majority of their pay, whatever their take-home pay is, in Nevada County, being that they will only be here 50% of the time. Next slide. The actual calculation that used in the RDN report was that all 312 Rise Gold employees with a gross payroll average of $122,000 per year will contribute that amount, pour that into the local economy at $38 million a year. Then with the multiplier effect for indirect and induced employment, adding 50%, it will have a total impact of $61 million per year. In my analysis, which increased the number of commuting workers on this 12-hour shift basis, 7 days in a row, and then going home for 7 days, I believe that the workforce is more likely to be probably like 58 or more % out of county commuters coming in, rather than only the 32% for 99 employees assumed in the RDN report. Reducing their contribution down to disposable take-home pay after backing out the 25% benefits, the 7% tax, you get to about a $91,000 per year disposable income, but much of that is mortgages, buying automobiles, payments for Amazon, things out of county. And so I believe that the actual amount of money poured into the local economy, not outside the county borders, is more like $54,000 for a resident that is employed in the Rise mine. For the workers that are commuting in and only here 50% of the time living in shared housing, my estimate was it's about $20,000 a year actually spent to contribute to the local economy. That reduces the annual economic impact in the county to $15 million, about 1/4 of what the RDN report provided. Next slide. From a construction perspective, the report indicates there will be an immediate impact to the economy because of the construction of an unknown amount of work that hasn't been quantified in the economic study, although there was some strong language in the environmental impact report that identified the magnitude of the construction. The construction is very specialized, it's industrial. I do not believe that the type of construction is compatible with the smaller, more general purpose contractors in Nevada County. I believe that the type of construction lends itself to a design, build, delivery, or a construction manager at risk type of delivery method, much more compatible with large experienced contractors who are found probably best in Sacramento area with a large and available workforce to complete this magnitude of construction in an 18-month timeframe, which I find to be very aggressive relative to the design, permitting process, and the construction. Whatever the level of construction is, I believe that most of the construction funding for labor and materials, about 70% or more, will go out of county, not be retained in county at all. The RDN estimate indicated a tax benefit to the county of the construction work of $17,000 a year, pretty minimum, even considering the basis that it was based upon Rise data. Next slide. Sales tax retained in the county was calculated based upon all of the gross payroll of all employees being retained in and poured into the local economy, $61 million per year at full production 4 years in the future. That would mean, from a sales tax perspective, the county would be expected to retain $611,000 a year from the sales tax. My analysis, which reduces the employee spending down to a in-county contribution and reduces the commuters to a $20,000 per year in-county contribution to the economy, yields $15 million a year, and reduces the sales tax retained by the county for other purposes to 1/4 of the RDN report, a rather minimal $153,000 per year. Next slide. Impact on local government services. At full production, the minimum is $17,000 per year contribution to the county coffers, the county budget. At a maximum, $700,000 per year, quite a long range. If one is a little more realistic and looks at the average of $350,000 a year, we should be taking a look at how that compares to the costs identified by the sheriff for an additional staff, $120,000, and increased cost by the city of Grass Valley that they tabulate in the RDN report at $170,000 a year. So at the average level of production and services, we're really looking at a near break even, $290,000 increased cost to local government and a $350,000 increased income to local government. And all of that is only realized by the government if the income is based upon 100% of the current gold price, and if the cost of mining that gold is only 50% of the national average per ounce of gold mined, and the production in the mine over time is at least 45% of what we believe to be a very optimistic and unverified guess as to what the assumed resources are, or the assumed reserves are. So I think it's very sketchy data at best that comes up with a break even for the local government and only at the full production rate. Next slide. There's also risks associated with all this, as Dr. Chambers talked about. There's a big risk that the total gold reserves are less than the level projected. If they're less, they would result in lower mineral reserve tax benefit to the county. If they've underestimated the operating costs, and reality is that the costs go up, that will reduce the profitability, that will reduce the mineral reserve tax accordingly. If there's less than 80 years of operation, if they run out of reserves, again, the impact would be a reduction of the economic impact. Then there's the unforeseen and of course uncosted problems of what happens with an environmental accident. The cost of disaster recovery and site cleanup might be borne by we, the taxpayers and citizens and the county. What about bankruptcy, which has happened before with gold mines? It's happened prior with the proponent. The county may be subject to clean up the sites and further environmental mitigation. The sudden closing of the mine for other economic reasons could result in some rather significant and immediate unemployment of those employees that are then resident in the county. And of course, what if other wells dry up? Wells that have not been mitigated by the basis of the approval process. The impact on individual properties could be catastrophic if other wells dry up in the future. Next slide. So I would suggest that there be certain conditions of approval added to the agreement, as Dr. Chambers alluded to strengthen compliance monitoring, to make sure they don't get by with a sleight of hand, an increase in oversight by professionals rather than relying on a lot of the self-performance and self-monitoring suggested by Rice, added financial and tax audit requirements just to make sure that they don't have two sets of books, one that undervalues the level of asset to reduce the taxes, or one that increases the cost of production beyond what it is to reduce the profitability. And above all, to insist on a bond or insurance, if you will, to cover all of the foreseeable and hopefully provide a fund for risk mitigation for the disasters that might occur. It would be nice to have teeth in the agreement so that the actual community benefits that are received by we, the people of the county, over the next 8 to 80 years is equal or exceeds the benefits that are included in the economic study, which is the project approval was based upon. Next slide. And the economic conclusions that I come to by looking at my listing of the data is that the RISE data is questionable because a lot of it was written a few years ago with a perspective of promoting the project, making a favorable projection to get county approval, and to possibly get additional investors. So it was written within the context of trying to paint the best picture possible for financing or investment and or approval. I also believe that the benefits to the community are substantially overstated by looking at the full payroll of all of the employees as opposed to only the disposable income spent in the county, that the costs of operation are understated, risks are totally ignored, and the cost of risks are not mentioned. And if you take a look at the maximum benefit in the RDN report to the county, the maximum benefit at full production of $750,000 a year, that works out to be $7 per resident per year. I asked the question, is $7 per resident per year at full production under the very optimistic assumptions used in the RDN report worth an overriding consideration, given the significant unmitigated environmental impacts that aren't costed, the many unknown costs that could be incurred, and the substantial future risks? I'm not sure it's worth risking our health and environmental degradation for $7 per resident per year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. That was a lot. Very interesting. So the next presenter is John Vaughan, and John is going to take another view of the economic report and pick it apart in a different way, or similar but complementary way. John Vaughan has been, let me introduce you, John, and then we'll go. John Vaughan has been a resident of Nevada County since 1967, and his water is served by a well approximately 100 yards from the southwest edge of the Rise Gold Mineral Rights area. He's served executive roles at various for-profit and nonprofit industries, including at Grass Valley Group, Utah Scientific, Precision Printers, and Pride Industries. He has extensive experience in software development, software selection, business analytics, including profit loss and cost benefit studies, as well as acquisition strategies and logistics. John, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and the floor is yours.
Good evening. We're going to cover three main topics today. Annual output, which is the RDN, which in the RDN economic impact report means revenue or total sales. We're also going to talk about the community impact, which is supposed to mean dollars that are spent in Nevada County. And finally, we're going to review what the report says about the impact on the county general fund. But first, some of the presentation numbers in the spreadsheets are in spreadsheets. Most of the time, I'd prefer to avoid that level of detail, but they're important in this case. I've spent hundreds of hours this year studying economic reports, and I've learned a few things. Next slide. The main thing I've learned is that economic studies often present an incomplete picture. The economic modeling software used in the RISE study, called IM-Plan, and is frequently used by companies that specialize in economic studies who are seeking project approval from decision makers. In fact, the RISE study and the independent study done by RDN used the same software. I'm not suggesting the county did anything wrong in selecting RDN. The modeling software is broadly used in the economic consulting industry, and RDN has an excellent reputation. I am saying it's important to know how the modeling software impacts the economic report. Next slide. A few of the issues that stand out regarding the IM-Plan software. Wait for the next slide here. Various Professional and academic reviews of the software state it is designed to make project proposals look good. They also indicate the software has a bias towards applicants, resulting in often inflated benefits and job creation. By design, the outcomes are always positive. There is no attempt to account for unplanned, unforeseen events and associated costs. It is not designed to show economic risk. The software doesn't accurately differentiate dollars that are spent in Nevada County versus dollars that are generated here or that go out of Nevada County. Next slide, please. Virtually all input for revenue and expenses came from Rise Gold. Most of the RDN report calculations start with Rise's production estimate of 104,000 ounces of gold per year. Based on models from the 1940s and 50s, it is not based on any current exploration or any current gold core sample. Expenses, the cost to extract and produce the gold, are low compared to industry averages, which makes the net profit higher. Higher net profit makes the economics look good for the county. Next slide. The IM plan output, or annual output, is the sum of all goods and services sold. In this case, it's the revenue generated in Nevada County. It does not mean spent in Nevada County. And apologies in advance, as the next couple of slides get a bit complicated. Next slide, please. This is directly from the RDN report, the annual output. We're going to talk about the numbers in the year 4 column, which represent the first year of full production. The direct item of 179.8 million is total revenue generated from 108,400 ounces of gold a year at $1,659 an ounce. The IM plan software uses a multiplier of 1.13 to estimate that there will be an additional $23 million in local spending or community impact generated from Rise's total revenue. What the 1.13 multiplier means is that for every dollar of revenue generated, there will be 13 cents spent in Nevada County. Next slide, please. 1 second. Annual output. This is the same annual output chart with 2 modifications. We're only looking at year 4, which is the proposed first year of full production, and the estimated community impact of 61.1 million is comprised of the multiplier effect plus the Rise total payroll of 38.1 million, which was not shown in the standard chart. Next slide, please. We're going to take a different look at the Rise data so we can understand what I call the real community impact. There are 2 scenarios to consider. First is that Rise identifies they expect to make $111,500,000 a year in profit after expenses. Virtually none of the profit stays in Nevada County. It goes to shareholders, the board of directors, and others. Rise has also identified $25.5 million in supplier expenses that are spent outside of Nevada County. To see what's actually spent in Nevada County, you need to remove both the profit and the supplier expenditures. When you deduct that, the number that should be, that's the number that should be applied to the multiplier effect, which results in 5.5 million of indirect and induced local spending, not 23 million. Then Rise claims total payroll of 38.1 million, but that includes employer taxes, benefits, employee taxes, virtually none of which are spent in Nevada County. The employee disposable income is closer to $20 million. So 5.5 million from the multiplier effect plus 20 million makes the real community impact about 25.5 million, not 61.1. Next slide, please. The second scenario to consider is that the Rise Gold claim of 68.3 million in annual expenses, which is how they arrived at the $111.5 million profit that we talked about on the previous slide. The expenses work out to about $630 an ounce to produce the gold. In fact, the industry average is closer to $1,200 an ounce. We'll talk more about those two items in a minute. Using $1,200 an ounce, annual expenses are almost double what Rise claims, and profits are cut in half. Smaller profits plus the out-of-county supplier expenditures changes the multiplier effect to $13.4 million. Employee disposable income stays the same, leaving a real community impact of about $33 million in this scenario. The bottom line is the real community impact is half what the RDN report claims as a direct result of input from Rise Gold. Don't worry, we're close to done, only a few more numbers. Now we're going to take a quick look at the claimed impact on the county general fund, or what RDN calls the high-end scenario. The general fund calculations are based on what is called mineral property or mineral reserves. In this chart, Rise Gold shows annual expenses of $68.3 million, which is how they arrived at the $111.5 million we talked about earlier. The present value of mineral reserves were then calculated based on net profit for a total of $536.7 million. But of course, there's more to the story. Next slide, please. The RDN report references the California Assessor's Handbook, section 510, in the part of the report where they talk about valuing mineral reserves. The handbook specifically states expenses for depreciation on things like buildings and equipment should be included when valuing mineral reserves. It appears there are no mitigation expenses, no expenses for depreciation of buildings and equipment. None of the components of the expenses section of an income statement seem to be included. $68.3 million in expenses only includes payroll and supplier costs. The industry average to produce an ounce of gold is approximately $1,200, likely because they've included all the costs. Using the industry average of $1,200 an ounce to compute annual expenses reduces net income, which in turn reduces county property tax benefits by almost 45%. The county general fund impact is then about half of what is shown in the report. Next slide, please. For me, the thing that stands out the most in these economic studies is they do not look at the cost of risk. Whatever economic benefit Rise claims or the RDN study predicts, both are estimates and both pale in comparison to the economic and environmental risks. The software is designed to show benefits and is not designed to show risks and real costs. This is the only project that could create an overnight catastrophe, a multi-million-dollar impact on the economy and the environment. For a county that justifiably prides itself on managing their budget well, this is a very high-risk venture. The data provided by Rise is designed to sell their story. It is not designed to show the facts. The bottom line is, don't be fooled by wild claims of economic benefit. Thank you, and that's it for me.
Thanks, John. Yeah, interesting. A lot to digest, and we will ask you some questions, or I'll ask you some questions as we get into the Q&A later. But thank you so much. So next, we have Charlie Brock, and Charlie has been a licensed realtor in California for 53 years. He's the past president of the Nevada County Board of Realtors. He's a founding director of the Nevada County United Way and has served on numerous nonprofit boards in Nevada County. Charlie, thanks for coming tonight and talking to us a little bit about the real estate aspect of this. proposal.
Greg. Can you hear me now?
You can.
Okay, I'm going to leave my video off. I also am on a very unstable feed and would like my audio to be take precedence. Thank you for the introduction. I might also add that during my many years as a realtor in Nevada County, I represented the estate of Marion Godoty, which was the owner of the Idaho-Maryland mine for many, many years. I started my career in 1980 here, and her estate was the owner there. Although I was unable to effect a sale of the primary mine holdings during my listing tenure, I did have the opportunity to familiarize myself with the mine's toxic legacy, as efforts were undertaken at the time to clean up a number of contaminated sites. So after a careful reading of Rise Gold's draft environmental impact report and the Niehaus impact report, my opinion is that the reopening of the Idaho-Maryland mine would very definitely negatively affect real estate values and be detrimental to the quality of life throughout Nevada County. The introduction of the Niehaus report states, and I'll quote, "Construction and operation of the proposed project could result in adverse environmental effects, such as increased traffic volume, noise levels, and visual impacts." Pardon me, I'm going to open my water here. Making the surrounding areas a less desirable place to live or visit, and in the event of long-term adverse effects, could translate to indirect financial costs in the form of reduced property values and county tax revenues. Several conditional coulds in there, but thank you very much, RDN. They go on to consider three potential determinants of value. They look at a review of related literature. They look at a local real estate industry survey where they surveyed local realtors. And then they looked at case study of other mines. They point out the limitations of each of these valuation methods and specifically state that, again, quote, "The results of the case study analysis are inconclusive regarding the magnitude of any potential impacts." That said, Niehaus goes on to use only the case study analysis to draw their final conclusion. And again, I quote, "We do not estimate any anticipated average change in property values associated with the proposed project." The Niehaus EIR has used contradictory statements along with questionable assumptions and methodologies to arrive at faulty and misleading conclusions regarding the mine's effect on real estate values. To double check my own thoughts regarding the value effects of reopening the mine, I contacted several appraisers, three of whom hold the highest designation, MAI, as members of the Master Appraisers Institute, and several other respected local appraisers who specialize in residential properties for banks and mortgage lenders. All of the appraisers I spoke with acknowledged that evaluating the effects of a mine on real estate value is an imperfect and difficult study. Value effects are not easily quantified. Among value studies and appraisers, and I spoke to realtors also, opinions I have gathered, I found consensus that a primary determinant of reduced real estate values is a function of the public perception of significant detrimental effects, real, potential, long and short term, of opening a mine. As well, local MAI appraiser Daniel Ketchum stated to me that the Niehaus EIR failed to implement accepted appraisal methodology, which has clearly led to an unsubstantiated conclusion that the opening of the mine would have no impact on value. He goes on to say an appropriately created study that includes comparison of controlled market data truly proximal to similarly operating mines, each being subject to the same market conditions at the same point in time, might have led to a much different conclusion. That ends that appraiser's quote. To repeat myself, I just want to close by saying that it's my opinion that the Niehaus economic report contradicts itself, which I think is very obvious, relies on questionable assumptions and methodologies. They discounted all realtors' opinions in order to arrive at a misleading and faulty conclusion. In my opinion, the reopening of the Idaho-Maryland mine will have an immediate, long-term detrimental effect on real estate values in Western Nevada County. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, something to think about. Really appreciate your opinion on this matter. I know you've been a realtor here for a long time. So next we have Martin Webb, and Martin is actually going to kind of, I think, talk a little bit more about what Charlie was talking about, which is property values and the kind of what has been talked about in the report and how it was talked about. And I think Martin's going to look at that a little more closely. So let me introduce Martin Webb. Martin has been in the renewable energy field for 25 years as a business owner and solar expert, which translated into a life of environmental activism for him. Whether producing radio shows on KVMR as the host of the Climate Report, or on TV as the host of Tipping Point. It's a new monthly program on the Nevada County Media, if you want to tune that in. And he has become a well-known voice for environmental awareness around a host of issues, including the proposed mine. So Martin, welcome again. We've had you on before, and we're certainly excited to have you back on this presentation series. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Excellent. So I'm going to look at the 3 case studies, which is what the RDN report felt were the strongest indicators for their conclusion that nothing would happen to our property values, and point out how we believe when you look a little bit closer, as the other speakers have done, the case studies don't really speak too well towards our situation with property values, but they do really show what the dangers are of having a mine near a community. So these might not be case studies for good results, might be for bad results. Next slide. But first, let's talk about the fact that while property values were directly mentioned in the scope of the report, as RDN talked about in last week's webinar and other speakers here have alluded to, there were a lot of important missing things in the stated scope of this report. There was no effort or ask for them to analyze Rise Gold's track record and their financial solvency. There was no economic assumption accuracy. They didn't vet the data that was provided with them. They just assumed all of it was perfectly real. They didn't give us an analysis of risks of failure and the likelihoods of outcomes. As the other speakers have alluded to, we should expect a cost to our community of the negative impacts. And for those who aren't aware, our tourism economy, just the tourism part in our county, is almost $400 million a year and almost 4,000 jobs created. And that wasn't in the scope to analyze, again, all of these negative aspects. But fortunately, the county did very specifically say, hey, please look at the impact on property value because that is so important to us. Next slide. And so they did dig quite deep into an analysis. To their credit, they did 3 different things. As Charlie said, they did a literature review as well as a case study and a survey of real estate professionals. And in the literature review, they found 13 key studies that talked about mining and other industrial activities and how they impact property values nearby. Out of those 13, 11 were negative impacts. One said there was no impact to having a rock quarry near a residence. And then one showed that if you're in the Netherlands and you live within a mile of any industrial project, you would see a 4% bump in property value. Otherwise, overwhelmingly negative impacts, up to 17% loss in value. Next slide. And so what did they do with this information? They dismissed it all as irrelevant. Instead, they framed the literature review as saying, well, there could be a range of outcomes of plus 14 or minus 17, smoothing over the fact that all of them, except for that plus 4, were showing some sort of negative impact or neutral. And what's most important, and I think that it's a really important takeaway from this economic report, is they struggled to find comparable literature, comparable case studies. They couldn't find anything that closely resembled the proposed project during the literature review. And so that really underscores this is an unprecedented project. Next slide. So before I talk about the case study, though, I want to show you a little bit more of the data of the survey of real estate professionals. 75 realtors replied. They were overwhelmingly based in Grass Valley, so they know the area. They weren't rookies. The majority of them had been spending more than a decade as a licensed professional here in Nevada County. And you can see that overwhelmingly they were somewhat familiar with the draft environmental report. They believed the impacts would be worse than the reports, and they even referred to the San Juan Ridge mine incident where a project was allowed to proceed, and there were serious negative impacts to the community that were never predicted or contemplated in the DEIR for that project. So they had real data and experience to come from. So they overwhelmingly believed home values would go down 15% or more, and most concerningly, they said that these impacts would be permanent. Next slide. So what did they do with this overwhelming negative information? They dismissed it as irrelevant, saying, including in the webinar last week and in the report, that it's merely uninformed opinion, not based on any data. Quoting from the report's page 43, they dismissed the real estate professionals by saying that the survey is largely influenced by perceptions of the proposed project impacts. Well, you just listened to the former president of the Board of Realtors, Charlie Brock, say that that's what drives property valuation, is the perception. But what's interesting is before they dragged the real estate professionals through the process of a survey to dismiss it, they started off that section by saying something that I think we can all agree with. RDN assumes that our local real estate industry professionals have a better than average understanding of the major factors that determine home prices in the area. However, the report dismisses their opinion out of hand. Next slide. The literature review showed a lot of negativity. The survey of real estate professionals assumed a lot of negativity as far as property value impacts. Those were dismissed. So then let's focus on their case studies. And it's noteworthy because, again, to their credit, RDN did a lot of work here. They looked at databases for the Mine Safety and Health Administration, the U.S. Geological Survey. They were able to tap into up to 300,000 different mining locations. And they were laser focused in the report on trying to make sure that they really found comparable mines to this proposed project. Is it a mine that had been open and is closed and open again? Is it a similar type of material and process? How close are homes to the site? And is this surface mining or underground? Well, they found only 12 mines came close to this proposed project. So in order to whittle those down further, at those 12 mines, they looked at the population and housing density within 3 concentric circles, 1 mile away, 5 mile away, 10 mile away. And in that regard, they found only 3 that they felt like were practical and relevant that were included as the case studies. Next slide. So let's talk about these 3. The first one is the Hale Mine. It was a surface gold mine located in South Carolina. Next slide. That's what a surface gold mine looks like from above. It's quite a different visual impact than underground. Here we have concentric circles with the mine's main operations right in the middle. Those 3 red lines represent a half mile, 1 mile, and 2 miles away. What you'll notice, of course, in this one of the 3 best case studies for our property values, there really isn't much around that mine as far as residences. Next slide. Then you can see with this, the next picture that's going to come up here, what it looks like. I believe that the next one might be a comparison to Grass Valley. There we go. So here's a half mile, 1 mile, and 2 mile, the same exact picture for the Idaho-Maryland Brunswick mine shaft right there at the corner of Brunswick and Bennett. You can see that this encompasses large swaths of Brunswick, plenty of Grass Valley citizens, Peardale, Union Hill, Banner Mountain, Cedar Ridge. Maybe click back one so that people can see the difference between how loaded our 2 mile and 1 mile and half mile radius is versus this first case study. And you can see that there really isn't a lot comparable in close proximity to the mine. Go ahead and click forward to the next one. Yep, so you can see that's the similar 2 mile circle. Go ahead and click forward twice. There we go. So then they had to go farther out. This is a 5 mile circle, and down the lower left-hand corner is a little town called Kershaw. And according to news reports, it's a very depressed small town off in the corner, and we do wish them the best. Click forward. But if you notice, in most of that 5-mile circle, there is nowhere near the same type of population density that you would see in Idaho, Maryland. So what's fascinating and helpful in this RDN report, on the right-hand side is a screenshot where they show a purple circle with properties within 3 miles of the mine sites. And you can see that Kershaw is down there in the lower left-hand corner. What you'll notice is there's hardly any properties near the mine, and you have to go 3 miles away to get close to them. Next slide. So what happened in this Hale mine when the analysis was made for this economic report? Here's what they saw. And they went 10 miles away and analyzed properties that far away. So within 10 miles of this mine, there's a slight bump from just under 100,000 to just over 100,000. That is current sales. That's $100,000, you'll notice, is from 2016 to 2022. So if you look at that purple circle, you'll look at that valuation, I think it's pretty clear that while they worked hard to find a comparable mine operation, they don't find comparable properties in proximity, and it certainly isn't the same value. Average median home sale value right now in Nevada County is around $500,000. So if you're analyzing a proposed project mine against property values, these aren't the same properties, these aren't the same values. It's basically around $100,000 either way. Next slide, please. So then the second case study that they looked at was a project that is in Tennessee. And what I want you to notice is the 2 dates at the very bottom of this paragraph. See where it says 2007, 2009. One of the other things that these are great case studies for is showing how these mines change owners often. For example, this mine had an owner until 2001. They closed it for 6 years. Another owner in 2007. 2 years later, another owner in 2009. So oftentimes these are just temporary plays to get a foot in the door and perhaps just flip the permit to another company willing to take it on, a revolving door of mine operators. Next slide. But let's look at the population density from satellite to really see, are these really good case studies for our properties and our values? The interesting thing about the Coy mine in Tennessee is, indeed, this was the one that actually had the largest population the closest to the mine. There's a town to the left of it, Jefferson City. Now, if you look at most of the concentric circles here, which is half-mile, mile, and 2 miles, you can see that in that 2-mile radius, there really isn't much on the right-hand side of that circle, but there is Jefferson City. So this was, out of the 3, the closest approximation of having a large amount of people very close to the mine. Next slide. And if we back out and take a look at the larger picture using a 5-mile radius, and again, it's important to note that for all 3 of these case studies, when they looked at home sales, they went out to a 10-mile distance. So here's the 5-mile ring around the Coy mine, and you can see a large part of it is undeveloped, and there's certainly a big water feature there. Next slide. So let's see, according to the report's authors, where all of the black dots lie for properties located within that. Oh yeah, and then here's the 5-mile look for us. If you go out 5 miles from Grass Valley, now you've got Nevada City, you're out to Bitney, you've got Chicago Park involved, you even have bits of Alta Sierra. There's a lot of development. If you look around within that 5-mile ring, you can see that there are roads leading to properties most everywhere. This is thousands and thousands of homes and properties here within that 5-mile circle. Next slide. So how does that compare to the Coy mine, which had the largest city the closest to the mine itself? Here's the screenshot from the report on the right. They drew a 5-mile radius around the Coy mine. You can see how it matches our 5-mile radius on the left, and you can see the sprinkling around of properties, and indeed there's a cluster that's right next to the mine in Jefferson City. Next slide. So what happened in this one that actually had the most properties the closest to the mine? What was the impact on their properties? Were they the same as far as value? because they certainly were similar as far as proximity. But when you're looking at property value, it's important to have comparable properties and comparable value. So within 10 miles of the Coy mine in Tennessee, they actually saw a loss in value, a 12% drop. So you can see that when there is something close to the mine, properties that are encircling it, there tends to be a loss. But we would also say that this still really isn't that comparable because the property values are a fraction of what we're seeing here in our area. Next slide. So let's take a look at the third and final case study, because again, what we tend to see is they did their best to find 3 mines that were similar to this proposed project, but they really struggled to find 3 communities and properties and values that were similar to this proposed project. So here is an underground gold mine outside Sutter Creek, California. Seems to be most similar as far as operation and mineral and process, and the closest as far as geography to California. But what I want you to take note of is in this picture right here, before we go into the concentric circles, this really gives you a great sense of the topography and how it matters. Right now we're looking southward. The mine is in the front. And then over in the distance is a little town of Sutter Creek. It also is a cute old mining town that has a tourist economy. But what you'll notice is around the mine is mostly just fields and a large hill that shields the noise and the view from the rest of the town. You'll also notice that there is an immediate spur off of Highway 49 that's on the right-hand side, so that the mine can operate with largely no traffic, visual, or noise impacts to Sutter Creek. And that's important to know, because this doesn't represent what our community would feel with our project. Next slide. So remember this picture right here as we go through these satellite shots with concentric circles, and then this is the last of the 3 case studies. But hopefully you're getting a sense of the fact that within the proximity to these mine sites, there really aren't a lot of development. So you've got a half-mile, a mile, and 2-mile red concentric circles. You have Sutter Creek there down at the bottom, because that other picture we were looking at was looking southward, so it was as if we were north of the mine looking south. And then there's a little city called Amador City off to what would be around 10 o'clock on the clock, or in a northwest direction. But otherwise, look within that 2-mile circle. There's practically minimal development and wildland there, and the closest town, again, is completely protected from traffic, noise, and visual impact. Next slide. And as a reminder, again, these are 2-mile red circles right there, the largest one, and the report continued to look at 10 miles away, analyzing all the property values, because sometimes that's how far away they had to go in order to collect enough properties similar to ours. So this is a 10-mile circle around the Lincoln mine that's in Sutter Creek. And you can see 10 miles around, there still isn't much around. Next slide. So while it is a comparable mine, it doesn't appear to be a comparable situation with properties. So here is their report with a 2-mile purple circle. You can see Sutter Creek properties, but look at that purple circle. It's mostly completely empty. And again, Sutter Creek is set aside from the impacts that we would feel, which would be visual impacts, traffic, noise. Next slide, please. So were they comparable, at least in value, and what happened at this underground mine? Well, they went 10 miles away, and what they proposed is that you might see a 17 or 18% jump in your property value. This was something that the report alluded to, saying, well, hey, look at Sutter Creek. If you're 10 miles away from this mine that no one can practically see or hear anyway, it seems like prices are okay if you get closer and closer to the mine. So this is also still a fraction of our values. So again, it's not quite similar property density and location. It's not quite our values. These are the 3 best that they could do. This means, again, that this is really an unprecedented project. Next slide. If you want to have a sense of the fact that their property values were expected to increase, we noticed that in California during that time period of the last slide around the Lincoln mine, California property values doubled. So if those properties only went up 18%, they actually were at a loss of under market value. So right here is what people are familiar with. This is the median sales price of houses in the United States over the last couple of decades. The gray bars are a couple of recessions. Next slide. And let's see how the before and after time periods for these three case studies aligned. The three before periods were generally when prices were flatter. The after values were when it was steeper. They didn't account for that fact and demonstrate what the expected property value increase would be due to the market. So we would submit that the Lincoln mine actually showed quite a loss below what its property value climb should have been. Next slide. And then lastly, to really underscore the unprecedented nature of our project in this proposal, along the bottom you can see the dates. It runs left to right, 1983 to the present year. There's a vertical dotted line right in the middle. That's just delineating the 1900s from the 2000s. And at the top you look at the Haley mine in South Carolina. Based on the RDN report, it was periodically mined and considered active until December 2002, closed for 8 years before it was reopened, had its ramp-up period, and then hit full operations. So their before values that they claimed the property values before a mine was open were during that time period. We would say that that's really not a good capture of before a mine's open, because the mine was just opened a few years ago. The same is true for the Coy mine in Tennessee. According to RDN, it operated until 2001, was closed for 5 years, and opened right back up. Down in Lincoln, they mentioned RDN report it was abandoned in 1999, closed for 13 years, reopened. So we would say that if these are the three best case studies, they actually show communities that have pretty much always had mines opened with a very brief period of closure. The difference here is in our community, our mine has been closed for a very long time. And so our development and our properties have encroached closely upon it, as these other communities likely would if they had mines closed for 70 years. We believe that's why they actually couldn't find properties close to these other three mines, because the mines have pretty much always been open, so why build next to it? Again, the unprecedented nature of our project. Next slide. So we don't feel it was a great case study for property values, but when we looked at these projects, they were great case studies for other things on how long it takes to get to full operation. There are three arrows here pointing out the three different phases considered with a project like this. There's pre-operation, while they're trying to get permits. There's the ramp-up phase. They've gotten permits and they're working to get to full operation, and then ongoing. Take a look at the last sentence in pre-operation phase, the first red arrow. At the end of that paragraph, it says, during this period, the general public learns about the upcoming project. Public perceptions can begin impacting property values already. Next slide. Now look at the three mines down below and how long it took to get from pre-operation to ramp up. But once they get their permits, from ramp up to ongoing, it took 6 years for the Haley gold mine, 2014 to 2020, 7 years for the Coy mine, 2006 to 2013, another 6 years for the Lincoln mine. So these case studies show in real life the three best, closest mines that they could find. There's a 6 to 7 year time lag from when they get the permit and ramp up to hitting full capacity. The screenshot you see right in the middle of this slide, though, this is from the RDN report. They just took whatever Rise Gold told them to be true, and Rise Gold thinks that they will be able to cut that into less than half. 18 months to get started, another 18 months for ramping up, 3 years, and boom, we've got full production. Next slide. Well, why is that important? So 3 years instead of 6 or 7 years, what's the big deal? Well, here's the big deal. When it comes to the impacts to our county general fund, this is a table that has the years across the top. And then you have a column of numbers under each year. You've got the cost to the community, to the county general fund. You've got the revenues, and then at the very bottom you have the net result. What's really important is what this shows is until this mine is actually in full operation, it's a negative net drain on our general fund. So if they say it's going to be 3 years and they have minimal experience, these three case studies of real life show it's likely going to be more like 6 or 7 years. that means an additional negative digging of a net hole for the community in our general fund, which means it's that much harder for them to climb out of it. Next slide. So these were great case studies for showing a few things, maybe not home property value impact because they weren't close to our values and they weren't close to our properties, but they were really similar mines, and it shows timelines likely take twice as long, costing our general fund a lot of money. We also discovered in looking at reports and news media that all three of these best case studies, similar to our project, incurred fines and failures to comply with environmental rules and regulations, sometimes totaling millions of dollars, for things like water quality, hazardous waste, and unfortunately, a fatality due to poor equipment maintenance at one of the three. These are also case studies showing how frequent the ownership changes, likely making this just a temporary hopeful investment before flipping it and selling it to the next mine operator. And these were case studies that show even if there was any sort of climb in property value, it was far below what the market average was. Next slide. So let's recap what we've talked about. What this report showed is the economic ripple effect on both local spending and local jobs is less than half of what Rise Gold says. And according to the other presenters here, likely even less than that. So Rise Gold got it wrong on the ripple effects of spending, the ripple effects of jobs, and the proposed timeline is likely going to be twice as long. If Rise Gold can't get these things right on paper, why should anyone trust them to do better in real life? What the report shows and the limited scope of its material shows that the economic benefits are likely lower and the costs likely higher. A few might share in the benefits if this proposal went through, but we would all share the losses. Next slide. That would be loss of tourism, loss of property value, loss of desirability. We show that most input for the revenue and expenses came directly from Rise Gold, someone who has no experience successfully running a mine. They've tried one other time to open a mine, and it was not successful. And so the facts of the proposal are questionable, but again, it wasn't within the scope of the authors to question Rise Gold. They assumed everything Rise Gold says is true, and they based their assumptions on making even more gold discoveries than what proven reserves have shown. Now, again, we've said the conclusions are only good as the data used, and all of the data came from Rise Gold. Next slide. There was also several costs that they didn't collect. There are dozens of long-term adverse environmental impacts in the DEIR: traffic, noise, vibration, visual. And in the report, the authors said, RDN themselves, that these types of long-term adverse impacts would make the surrounding area a less desirable place to visit. So there would be economic costs. And in the surveys of local businesses and real estate agent professionals, they all agreed. But RDN didn't try to quantify the economic cost to real estate. Or actually, that should say the economic cost to tourism. If we lost just 5 to 10% of our tourism, if we were able to keep 90 to 95% of our tourism levels after this mine opened, which is just a theoretical maybe, we would still lose $20 to $40 million a year, meaning we would lose 200 to 400 jobs. That alone would offset and wipe out any purported gains from this mine proposal. Next slide. And that's only if we lost 5 to 10%. Let's try and quantify the loss of property values that the authors did. They said there would be no impact on property values because when they looked at the 3 case studies, they were inconclusive. When they looked at the literature, it was irrelevant. When they talked to local experts, they didn't know what they were talking about. But again, there was no comparable academic studies. And the survey of real estate agents projected a loss. So while RDN didn't try to quantify the impact on property values, we can just run a back of the envelope. There are 2,000 homes located within a half mile of the mineral rights, not a half mile of the mine, a half mile of the mineral rights, which spread underground much farther than the mine. If those 2,000 homes within a half mile of the mineral rights just lose 10% of our average median home sale price of $500,000, that's $100 million in total property value loss. Now, homes might sell an average of every 15 years, so if we divide that by 15, it would average out to almost $7 million a year, on top of the $20 to $40 million losses in tourism. Suddenly we're approaching almost $50 million a year in lost property value and tourism. Next slide. Which about equals what they're proposing. So this limited scope masked the costs, overstated the benefits, and showed that Rise Gold is not ready. This project is not ready for reality. And if you take accurate costs and benefits and weigh them against each other, at best, this proposal, if everything goes according to plan with a rookie operator with a shaky track record, this might be a wash if we're lucky. More than likely, though, it'll be a net loss long-term for the community, at worst, a catastrophe. The applicant's limited experience and their prior mining venture, which they're still under litigation for damages, they tried to open a mine, and within a couple of years, it was bankrupt and it was facing fines. In our consensus of reading this report, even with its limited scope and filling in the gaps, the risk for this project clearly outweighs the reward. With that, I think we're ready for Q&A. Thanks, everyone, for listening through that long presentation part.
All right. Thank you so much, Martin. So, everybody, we are, as you can see, going over time. And I think most of us are fine to continue. If we hope that we would like to give an opportunity to respond to some of the questions and answer questions that came in. I guess I want to say, I know that probably people will need to go to dinner and things like that, so we may start losing people. But Traci, do you want to say something very briefly about what actions to take, or should we just forego that for this evening and jump into the Q&A? So we could do yours now really quickly, and then we can just take as many questions as we can before, I don't know, we should set a cutoff date, cutoff time. But
sure. Well, if Christy wants to queue up that slide, then I can definitely do that and go over it really quickly for folks, and then we'll launch into Q&A. So go ahead. So there are 3 steps to take action this month. The first step is to go enjoy the holidays. As many of you know, the FEIR, was released on Friday, the 16th. And so when we come back from the holiday break, January is going to be critical, just like the slide says. We need to submit comments and letters on the FEIR, and CEA is putting together the information to help everyone in those comments. So this is a call for all hands on deck in January. So step 2 is all hands on deck. And then the third step is to look out for the meeting, because there will be a public meeting with the Planning Commission. And it's a high priority to have big turnout for it, just like we did, I can't remember what month, in April. So that's your 3-step plan there. Enjoy the holidays, write comments in January, be prepared to go to a meeting in February or March. And so now we can move on to Q&A. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Traci. So everybody who can, it's panelists, can you turn your video back on so people can see you? And for those, Jim and Martin, probably, and Charlie, who have more limited internet access this evening, you can just keep yourselves video off just so that you don't have a problem. We got a number of questions in the question and answer section, and I'm going to try to sort of condense them a little bit and see if we can make this a fairly fast process here. So there was a lot of several people in their questions were making the comment that, look, this is good information, but unless the planning commission, and the board of supervisors is listening, it's only going to be heard by us. And so, how do we get the commissioners and the board of supervisors to listen? Are they only going to be listening to the planning department? Like, how do we expect this process to go? Anyone want to take that? Ralph? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, so the Planning Commission will hear they'll have a hearing, and they'll consider the EIR. and they'll have to certify it or else not certify it if they, and I would hope that they won't certify this EIR, at which point I would expect that it might be appealed and go to the Board of Supervisors. But they might end up certifying, or they might actually send it back to go back to be recirculated, which is what we would have expected them to do in the first place. Then it goes to the Board of Supervisors, and ultimately it'll end up on the Board of Supervisors to make an up or down vote on the project, and they would have at some point the final EIR has to be certified, and then it also if there's overriding, I mean, if there's unavoidable and significant impacts, they have to have a statement of overriding considerations, which is usually based on the economic benefits of a project. And they can use that to approve the project. I think that answers your question, but maybe not completely.
Christy, do you want to make a comment about that?
Yeah, I just wanted to assure everybody from a communications perspective. I'm Christy Hubbard, one of the volunteers. And I just wanted to assure everybody we have absolutely every intent to package up this information and deliver it to the supervisors. So this specific webinar will be delivered to them as public comment. In addition, several of the people on our volunteer team, several of the people that you've listened to today actually have been making appointments with supervisors to share, parts of this information. So we are absolutely sharing.
One of the commenters asked the question whether, is there actually a public process for commenting on the economic study? Aside from making a date with a supervisor or asking to talk to them?
Well, from what I've heard talking to the county, this was considered a final economic report, so they weren't really going to take comments and make adjustments, but they also encouraged us to submit our comments, and they may consider them, but I think it's important to submit our comments, and hopefully they may not change the economic study, but they'll be considered by the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission when they make the decision. So it's past the time to submit comments, but I would still go ahead and submit them anyway. They'll probably find their way to the right spot. You can use the link that was used originally, or else we can put up the link of the consultant, the county employee who's handling the project.
One of the questions is addressed to something I think that you talked to, Dr. Chambers, is the that a bond would be typically required for most projects like this. And you gave some kind of figures, some numbers that were pretty wide in range. Based on your kind of assessment of this project, do you have any idea how big a bond for risk mitigation would be a good number for a project like this?
So a typical reclamation bond for a project like this is probably $20 to $40 million, but that's under the assumption that there's no water treatment involved. If there's water treatment involved, then the numbers easily double that. But even at the low end, that's a significant amount of money, and it's basically money that taxpayers are liable for should anything go wrong and the money not be there.
Sure.
That's why it's important.
Okay. I wanted to address a question to Jim and John. You both worked through the RDN's report numbers, which stated an annual output of 61 million in the community impact from the mine. And both of your calculations reached significantly lower figures than the RDN number. And your numbers differed a slight amount. I believe yours was 15 million, Jim, and yours, John, was about 25. And so I just wanted to know, how would you guys explain the difference between your two figures? I know you guys didn't work together, so you kind of looked at stuff independently and came to these conclusions. Can you address that at all?
Well, I significantly reduced the economic impact of 180 full-time mine employees who I believe are going to be commuters, where the majority of their payroll goes out of county, and the only thing they're spending in the county is for shared rent when they're in county working and for the equivalent of 14 days a month worth of meals. So I calculated that their contribution to the economy is nowhere near the $122,000 a year of a full-time resident family with 2.4 people in the household. It's more like $20,000 a year of money that actually goes to something in the county, be it rent or be it buying groceries or meal. That's the substantial difference between my economic contribution of the employees.
Yeah, that's correct. We both kind of came at this from different directions. And in my case, I was trying to be really conservative about employee disposable income. It's probably substantially less than what I used in the chart. So our numbers sound like they're different, but they're really not.
Okay, yeah. All right. So I'm looking here over the questions. I want to make sure I got everything covered. There's a comment from one of the participants in this tonight's meeting, and her comment is that Nevada County's economy is largely an amenity economy, and that the comparables that were used in the RDN study, and I think Martin sort of pointed at this, were industrial manufacturing economies. And I guess it's more of a comment than a question, but if anyone wants to sort of address themselves to this idea, her comment is that she believes that the consultant really needs to find communities with amenity economies. Amenity, I guess, would mean tourism, right? I'm not sure if there's a question there, but I just wanted
to make a quick comment.
Yeah, sure.
When I was looking at these three different case studies, a couple of them did have a slight bit of a tourism economy. It's a fraction of ours. Both the Coy mine in Tennessee, that's the one that was the closest to a town. Jefferson City, you might recall, was just to the left of the mine. That was the one that did see a drop in values. And they have about $100 million a year tourism economy compared to our $400 million a year. And then the Lincoln mine in Sutter Creek, that's the one where you remember we had the aerial shot showing how the mine was actually quite protected from the rest of the town. They similarly had about $100 million a year tourism economy. I would say, excuse me, I would say that, you know, to the commenter's point here, and as I mentioned, they just couldn't find communities like ours next to facilities like this. You know why? Because people don't do it. This is an unprecedented project, and these three case studies, as I showed in the timelines, were communities that actually have had consistently active operating mines with very brief periods of inactivity. And I agree with the commenter, and that's really the big takeaway from this attempt at finding comparables is there aren't any. This is unprecedented, and we shouldn't be the first.
Okay, thanks. I'm aware of time. It is 7:53 according to my computer clock, and we've gone way over. And I want to give an opportunity to open up to people who want to comment live. And let me just see if we have anybody who's got. So if you would like to make a comment, please raise your hand using the icon at the bottom of the screen, and we will acknowledge you. Okay, I see 1, 2. So Ray Briers, we'll start with you. Okay, I'm going to allow you to talk. So you are live. Go ahead, Ray.
Hi. Previous studies have looked at alternative uses for that property, and they included that in a financial analysis. I did not see that. Can you comment?
Anybody want to take that?
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, in the previous study that was done for the 2008 project, they did do alternatives, and that economic study was actually included in an EIR document, and they included the no project alternative. And surprisingly, or not surprisingly, the no project alternative was shown to have more economic benefit to the community than the mine project because it would have allowed normal growth to continue on. It was a different project than this one in many ways. Most of it was on the Idaho-Maryland Road site, the Centennial site. And so they talked about the commercial development, if left to grow at the normal rate, would provide more net benefit to the community and more jobs after 20 years. So, and it would have been nice to have something like that on this report, but it wasn't done, I guess. I don't know why.
I would add that the draft EIR also eliminated without review the option to use the already zoned property for a business park. And they did that because they said that large volume distribution and or auto dismantling and or large planing mills, which are currently zoned, would create just as much noise and traffic, if not more. And I happen to have a lot of background in logistics, and there's no chance any of those operations would locate there today. In today's world, it's just not practical from a logistics standpoint. So they used comparisons again that are not realistic to eliminate the use of the property as a business park.
Thank you. All right, so next person to I'm going to allow speak is Itara O'Connell. Itara, go ahead. You're allowed to, and you may need to unmute yourself as well.
Am I unmuted?
You are. I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. My comment is just about this. We never really hear about the Superfund site, what's going on with that. That was supposed to be taken care of by this company. And none of that is really addressed in any of these reports. So I just want to make a comment about that, that seems to be a big factor that's not really being addressed anywhere. Thank you.
Ralph, do you want to?
Yeah, I'd comment on that. It's called the Centennial site now, and it's not actually designated as a Superfund site. It was pending a designation when the DTSC took it on, and so the Superfund designation is conditionally deferred as long as the DTSC is working to get it cleaned up. And the progress on that's been slowed, and they don't expect to have a final remedial action plan approved until sometime next year, and the more details on the project won't be done until after June of next year, according to the DTSC schedule. But what's important to note is that the mine intends to dump the mine waste on that site, but it has to be cleaned up first. And this is one of the issues with the draft EIR that we felt needed to be recirculated, and the baseline of that project in its current state needed to be included. And the cleanup needs to be included, because otherwise there's no real determination as to whether they'll even be able to use the site or not, and what the status of it will be when they use it, how much economic and environmental impact there will be, and so forth. I hope that answers your question.
So we are at 7:59. I think we really need to wrap this up. And so for those who didn't get a chance to ask their question, I'm so sorry. We just need to end this. And so if you have any questions that you would like to have answers, please just send them to Ralph, Mine Concerns, is that correct?
Mine Concerns, yeah. MINECONCERNS at CEA-NC.org. You can find a link to it probably on the MineWatch site.
Okay.
That's just Mine Concerns.
Yeah, and I just want to say to all the panelists, thank you very much for participating tonight. It was really valuable. There was a ton of information, all of it really interesting and varied, and I hope it gave all of us some things to think about, as well as ways to help us communicate with our friends and community about the decision process that's going to be happening quite soon in the next few months. So with that, I would like to say good night. Again, thank you to everyone, and we'll see you soon somewhere.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.